Lee Winnell and James Wan's early career work significantly impacted the evolution of American horror films in the 21st century. Their debut film Saw, written by and starring Winnell and directed by Wan, inadvertently helped to spawn the torture porn movement in America. The first Saw film was limited in its blood, instead opting for a thriller-style film that served more as a low-budget riff on Seven than as a true splatter film. The sequels evolved the series into the iconic example of excessive splatter horror films. This gave the first film a reputation for graphic horror that it did not match. Wan was bothered by this reputation as he was attempting something very different in his approach to horror. His subsequent directorial efforts, Dead Silence written by Winnell and Death Sentence, were critical and commercial failures. He and Winnell needed to make a successful film to re-energize their careers. Their attempt to do so showcased their unique horror filmmaking philosophy and would once again help shift the entire American horror film landscape. In today's video, I will explore Insidious in detail. I will explain its production history and context, examine its influences and lasting impact, and give my thoughts on the film's quality. So with that said, let's explore Insidious. Jason Blum had made it big. Blumhouse Productions was built from the overwhelming success of the indie micro-budget found-footage horror film Paranormal Activity. The Oren Peli-directed film was made on a reported $215,000 budget and reaped massive gains with a worldwide box office total of over $194 million. The film sparked two major evolutions within the genre. The first was that it served as the popularizer of the found footage subgenre that had mostly laid dormant since the Blair Witch Project. The subgenre soon became oversaturated with other micro-budget films in an attempt to strike gold. The second major evolution was the gradual shift away from torture porn and back to the paranormal as the mainstream expression of the American horror film genre. There was a slow death of the early aughts preference for the bleak and gritty post-9/11 horror aesthetic and the remake craze. As the decade was winding down, so too was the Asian horror and classic horror remake boom, and the torture porn era was dealt its final blow with the temporary end of the Saw saga with the release of the final chapter in 2010. Blum's Paranormal Activity movies killed the Saw series at the box office, so what a perfect match Blum and Peli would make with the franchise's creators. Wan and Winnell had many ideas for horror films they had developed while in film school. One of them had been Saw. Another idea they had been holding on to was an astral projection horror film. They felt this was a unique idea and something they wanted to see. Winnell developed their idea into a feature film script that the duo took to Blum, who latched onto the project. They had a built-in marketing campaign, brought to you by the creators of Saw and Paranormal Activity. The film would be a back-to-basics low-budget affair, a welcome approach for Wan after his studio films had been mired in creative conflicts with executives. Blumhouse promised creative freedom as long as you made the film under tight budgetary and time constraints. The film was shot on a 3-week principal photography schedule and a reported budget of $1.5 million. The cast would be composed of Patrick Wilson and Rose Byrne in the lead roles, alongside Lynn Shay, Barbara Hershey, Ty Simpkins, Angus Sampson, and Lee Winnell. The film had two cinematographers, David M. Brewer and John R. Leonetti. Leonetti worked on the genre classic Poltergeist as first assistant cameraman and had directed multiple films in his own right, most notably Mortal Kombat Annihilation. Blum and Peli produced the film alongside Steve Schneider, with Leonetti serving as co-producer, alongside Aaron Sims, Brian Kavanaugh Jones as executive producer, and Jeanette Volturno as line producer. Kirk Morey and Wan edited it, and McCarthy and Kelly Gazelle cast it. Scott Mobley and Aaron Sims were production designers, and Joseph Bashara provided the music and acted in the film. It had its world premiere during the iconic Midnight Madness program at the Toronto International Film Festival on September 14, 2010. After the screening, Sony Pictures bought the U.S. distribution rights. The film was released by the distribution company Film District in the United States on April 1, 2011. The opening weekend garnered significant interest, with the film making over $13 million in the U.S. This eventually led to the film making over $54 million domestically and just short of $100 million worldwide. This was a massive return on investment for Blumhouse off its reported $1.5 million budget. It proved that their formula could be replicated to great success. This was a turning point for the company, Wan and Winnell's careers, and the genre. The new decade for American horror films was being defined by the appearance of ghosts, with the return of the paranormal horror film as the main mode of genre expression in the wake of a decade of stewing in the milieu of post-9/11 paranoia. Critical reception was mixed, with a Rotten Tomatoes score of 66% and a Metacritic score of 52 out of 100. Some critics felt the film was cliched, boring, and unscary, such as in the Austin Chronicle, which tore apart the film, with critic Mark Savlov stating in his review, quote, "By the horrifically unshocking ending of the film, you feel as though you've just watched a lamest hits reel of lesser genre fare," end quote. The Hollywood Reporter felt the film had a limited appeal, quote, "The movie has strong prospects with genre audiences, but won't spawn a phenomenon resembling the filmmaker's previous franchise," end quote. This attack on perceived, boring, ritualistic adherence to genre cliches pervades the critiques of the film. The praise pointed to Wan's direction, the cast's performances, and the score as selling points for a fun roller coaster thrill ride. Variety called the film, quote, "exceptionally vivid by modern horror standards," and the score, "patently ridiculous and rather effective," end quote. In a guest review for Bloody Disgusting, drummer Shannon Larkin called it, quote, "a fun romp to Ghostville," end quote. The film's mixed reception also pointed to a major contentious element, the campy humor. Wan and Winnell incorporated this to great effect in their first film, Saw, and leaned into it here. Some felt this undermined the horror, while others appreciated the tongue-in-cheek approach. Now, with that context laid out, let's get into my thoughts on the film. The film is split stylistically, starting as a patient, old-school haunted house film permeated by a strong, desaturated look. This then shifts into a possession horror film that features an energetic style of Italian horror-inspired maximalist filmmaking before crescendoing with a full embrace of astral projection through a hysterical, heightened theatricality that flows with the color red. Wan directs the hell out of this film, taking Winnell's usage of well-worn horror tropes beyond the constraints of a straight horror film. What I mean by that is, this film embraces camp, humor, and melodrama to make memorable horror moments. Wan doesn't attempt to straddle a line between humor and horror, but instead indulges deeply in both, intentionally making a lot of what could be dour, colorful, and fun. There is a strong embrace of cliched characters, story beats, and settings, but the film is thrown so far off the typical genre path that a new style emerges. The beginnings of the film settles us slowly into a slow burn horror approach, taking us through the motions of a typical haunted house story. The house is well cast and the family is relatable. Patrick Wilson and Rose Byrne feel like a real couple with real problems. I especially love that the first half of the film is told through Byrne's character, Renee Lambert. Her emotional footing is already unbalanced due to the stress of domestic life, and this is further compromised throughout the narrative, with each new horror only serving to heighten her distraught state. Patrick Wilson gives a weird performance as Josh. He seems so distant and emotionally unavailable. However, we have small moments that show a strong sense of vulnerability in his character. I feel he was underutilized in the first half, or even 3/4 of the film. This seems to be an intentional choice by the filmmakers in an attempt to showcase his deep internal conflict due to his repressed memories. We have small moments where he has flashes of these memories, but he only gets a chance to develop at the end of the film, a chance to be the hero, to redeem himself in a way from his earlier distancing. This is the opposite with Byrne's character, whose emotional downfall is traced as the core of the film through the first 3/4 of the narrative before she is sidelined for the ending. This was a disappointing use of a good actress and made her arc fall a bit flat. The early haunted house scenes are well directed by Wan, showcasing a development in his craft that would be more fully explored in The Conjuring. He takes some risks here as well with his approach to the horror. Even though it's in a slightly subtler tone, there is still a sense of his campy, heightened theatricality that is imbued in the first portion of the film. The loud and dominant score from Bashara overwhelms the senses, making small paranormal horror scenes much more dramatic. This undermines the slower approach he's going for at moments, but it sets a more consistent tone for the picture that is only heightened as time goes on. Once we move houses and the horror continues, the shift into possession horror is met with an even stronger, overwhelming tone. Once we get to this portion of the narrative, the audience must be fully committed to suspending their disbelief. Lin Shaye's introduction is the moment of no return stylistically for the film. Her monologue redefines the parameters of the horror film we find ourselves in. Before her first appearance, we have the iconic jump scare scene involving the red lipstick demon. This scene is so emblematic of Wan's approach, featuring a long, frantic monologue from Barbara Hershey's character, which is then matched with the appearance of an admittedly silly-looking Darth Maul demon whose jump scare is hammered home by Bashara's overwhelming score. There is another moment before Lin Shaye's first appearance that critics more easily identify as being intentional humor, with the comedic relief duo of Tucker and Specs, played by Inga Sampson and Lee Winnell, making their first appearance. Their dynamic is fun and funny, providing a moment to breathe and appreciate two likable characters. This more obvious humor serves a different purpose than the campier horror moments that many find humorous. Many critics and audience members see those campier moments as being unintentionally funny, but I believe they are intentional. As I said earlier, Wan and Winnell wanted to incorporate a strong sense of camp and humor into the film. Winnell spoke on this intention in an interview with The Biz, discussing how the scene introducing Billy the Puppet in Saw was viewed as being distractingly silly or campy, before ultimately becoming an iconic and defining moment for the entire series. This led them to lean into this approach in Insidious, stating, quote, "We hope that the same thing happens where the more outlandish stuff over time becomes the stuff that people love about the film." End quote. This can be seen in the seance scene, where a potentially silly moment, having Lin Shaye in the gas mask, uses this lean into the outlandish to stand out. This makes the cliched elements of Winnell's screenplay look fresher than they otherwise would. This embrace of storytelling techniques, such as intentional camp, humor, and general silliness, has made this an iconic horror film. Wan's commitment to his style of directing felt fresh in a sea of remakes and grittier horror films. For a mainstream paranormal horror film like Insidious to lean into these elements was risky, but made the film have many iconic moments. It also helped to create the feeling of a roller coaster, constantly swinging audience members through a pendulum of emotions. Winnell also spoke about the duo's inspiration that they got from the work of Dario Argento.
We were inspired by filmmakers like Dario Argento, who take a very operatic approach.
This balancing of Italian horror inspiration and Hollywood horror tropes was the attempted recipe for the duo. Inspiration was found in predictable classics such as Poltergeist. Many reference points are taken straight from Tobe Hooper's classics, such as Lin Shaye being a modern version of Zelda Rubinstein's medium Tangina Barons. There are several references and plot beats taken from that film. There was also inspiration taken from films such as Amityville Horror 2, The Haunting, and Carnival of Souls. This choice to meld several competing influences into one narrative led to lots of complaints of cliched writing and directing, of relying too heavily on tropes, but I believe that Wan and Winnell used those tropes and cliches to build a bridge with the audience, to then take them places they otherwise wouldn't be willing to go. The works of Dario Argento were never major successes in the United States, and his career move to the country fell flat. His unique style and reliance on dream logic do not fit with the American film-going audience, who expect more narrative coherence and plot explanation and exposition. Unanswered questions, illogical narratives, plot holes, and the like are torn apart from American audiences, which is probably the reason that Wan and Winnell made the regrettable decision to consistently explain so much of the plot to the audience. There is too much reliance on character monologues to lay down heavy exposition for the audience. Luckily, the film has Lin Shaye and Barbara Hershey to lessen the blow and be so entertaining, but this still hurts the film. There is also a consistent lack of faith in the audience to put things together. For example, the usage of Dalton's drawings in the film. At first, they are meant to be seen as innocent backdrop material that would fit within a child's bedroom. Later, at the key moment of most plot convenience, Josh stumbles upon them and puts it all together, that Elise is not lying and that his son is in the further. Later in the film, as Josh is exploring the further, he stumbles upon the red door from Dalton's drawings, and the film shows us the drawings again, as if we forgot, not trusting us to put even the most basic things together. Now, like I said, this seems to have been a strategic choice to cater to an American audience, especially a teen audience, but it hurts the film and is one of my major critiques of it. This worked from a financial perspective, but I wonder how it would have been received if they had leaned further into a true Italian horror-style approach to the film. There is an over-reliance on tropes from American horror films that plague Winnell's screenplay. At times, this is so strong that even Wan's direction is unable to save some of these moments. These are my major complaints about a film that I otherwise enjoy. I love the performances in the film. Byrne's performance is strong. Wilson's is uneven, but ultimately, he shows enough vulnerability and has a nice final act that makes his character feel whole in a way that Burns is never afforded. Lin Shaye delivers an iconic, career-defining performance. She is awesome in this film, completely understanding her role and the type of film she is in. Her ability to convincingly and entertainingly deliver long exposition dumps is crucial to the film. Wan and Winnell were so lucky to find her, as she is the core of the film. She, in my opinion, is what truly made the series take off and become so iconic. The duo struck gold again with an older, experienced actor who had mostly worked in smaller roles throughout their career, with Tobin Bell being a similarly awesome and surprising star for the Saw films. Sampson and Winnell are fun in their comedic relief role, and they are very likable, which helps to add to the emotional core of the film. You don't want bad things to happen to them. This is something Wan would continue to develop further in his career, but he does a good job here of developing an emotional core to the narrative that brings us into the film, allowing for the wackier elements of the film to land better, and for it to be more impactful when the scary things happen. This is not a deep or philosophical film, nor one that strives to completely reinvent the cinematic wheel. Wan is not a master of psychological filmmaking, with his quotes showcasing a more simplistic approach to the film.
Red and black are my color palettes that I love. It really adds to the psychology of the film. And I really wanted the color red to represent the evil in the movie.
I love that quote, but it showcases the shallow nature of the PG-13 horror film that Insidious is. It's a stylistic exercise in maximalist filmmaking on a low budget. Wan's directorial ability grew tremendously between Saw and Insidious, his two films in between really helping him to grow and better learn how to harness the technical aspects of filmmaking to accomplish his stylistic goals. There is some ambitious camera movement that promotes the energetic style of the film. The use of color is strong in moments, though the desaturated look isn't that pleasant to look at. The production design, especially in the further, is awesome, with the red lipstick demon's lair being immaculate. Wan not only showcased his growth, but also previewed the type of director he would become, with his style so well distilled into this film. His heart is put into the project, and his collaboration with Winnell heightened both of their talents beyond the screenplay's potential pitfall into cliched mediocrity. It helped to redefine horror films for the new decade and push forward major players on the business side of the genre. Insidious is a horror film I loved growing up, and I continue to come back to the film as an enjoyable slice of over-the-top, campy, melodramatic horror. Sequels would follow, and Wan and Winnell would continue to work within the genre, helping to push its limits again and again. Insidious has its problems, but it still stands out as a defining piece of American horror.